Welcome back to Cattle Call for a new week. Cattle Call is a production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association in partnership with Wolf Auto, Small Town Strong. And we have a lot to talk about today with Brad Kooima and Varilek there at Sioux Center, Iowa. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because when don't we have something to talk about? But I do feel there are a few things that we should go through here this week. We're going to talk imports and exports. We've got a couple of listener and viewer questions to work through. But first of all, the recap from last week, a little bit of a bounce last week. What do you make of what we saw in the cash market, Brad?
Pleasant surprise on the cash market last week for sure, Chad. And thanks for having me on and working around my schedule today. The cash market was a surprise, I think, to even the most optimistic. And we finished up in the north here at 240, fully $5 higher for the week, and the south basically traded at around 230. South trades a little harder to just put a pinpoint on. The market though being higher after we'd had a few weeks there where we had backed up quite a way, so that was a nice surprise, right? And I think one of the things I'm going to throw on top of the strength in the cash market was I know in more than one instance, maybe is the right word, of cattle that were sold Friday to a couple of different packers that were delivered on Monday of this week. So I think you saw the packer also use up some inventory, got himself closer to the knife. And there goes that. There's that, my favorite word lately, and that is that goes to show you where leverage is at. A very fun week. The cash side of the thing still seems to be driven by what I believe, Chad, is a tighter supply than anyone expected in the north. Current status in the north, much more so than in the south. I just looked through all the average weights here again this morning, and the south is way over last year and way over the averages. Texas and Kansas, where Nebraska is a little over and Iowa only slightly over what average would be. So the north continues to paddle the boat here, and as goes the north, so goes the market, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned something last week, and we didn't get time to fully vet it, but we brought up this idea of imports and exports. What is the value of exports to the Nebraska, the Iowa, the cattle producer in the plains? Do we need imports, or should we be self-sufficient? You've had about a week to kind of contemplate that. What is the value of imports, or what is the status of imports? What is the value of imports to the beef sector here domestically?
It's a very complex question, and I'm going to give it an attempt, and I'm going to throw this out there. I am not trying to start an argument. This is an issue that's very polarizing within the beef industry, right? I think some on both sides have tried to oversimplify the matter. I'm going to speak to it, I guess. Well, let me give you some stats here, first of all. So beef production year to date in the United States is down a little over 300 million pounds. Beef production is pretty easy to come up with, right? Number of cattle, what did they weigh? That's how much beef we got. Conversely, our import export has been in a great imbalance for a long time. 22 out of the last 23 months, we've imported more beef than we've exported. Part of that's because we are darn short of cattle here in the U.S. Smallest cow crop since 51, blah, blah, blah. I mean, so we got less cattle. So obviously you're going to export less. All right. But, the import thing for some especially, and I only pointed out just to give them maybe a little bit of perspective here, Chad, but, one side would be up in arms. We shouldn't be making any beef in here. And I'm actually in the camp that I think we need to have some imports of beef. I would be also very much in the camp that the consumer should be able to know what they're eating is coming from. You peel a banana, it's got a sticker on it, you know where it came from. That part of this whole issue just plagues me, that there isn't a way for the WTO and everybody else to figure out how it works for so many other commodities. Why doesn't it work for this? So now the proponent of having imports is going to say something like this: we need this grinding meat, which is largely what you're getting out of Brazil, right? Brazil makes up over a third of the total imports of all the other countries put together. They do a third of it. It's a big deal. They're going to say that, well, if we don't import this grinding meat, this hamburger type meat, this maybe what the fast food type restaurant is using. We're going to have to use up chucks and rounds and everything else, the rest of our regular U.S. Domestic produced beef, and that's going to drive the price of beef even higher for the consumer. I think that both sides stretch the issue a little bit. Let's label it. Let's figure out where it's coming from, and this is an issue that goes right to the top, right? I mean, this is what Trump's been dealing with. How do you get it so that it's fair? I guess that's my shot at it. But we are definitely importing a ton of this grinding meat here lately. That's for sure. No question about it.
And I think maybe why it's being talked about again, right, Brad, is because of those imports from Brazil. And would that affect consumer prices? Kind of back to this idea, and we'll get into our listener question now. And it kind of goes towards this free market idea that we were talking about this off air. But our first question that we're going to attempt to go with today here, ultimately, it's the question of how do you get young people or new people? How do you attract them into the cattle industry? I think agriculture has been struggling with this for a long time. Maybe not a marketing question, but again, just the future of ag question. What do you think of this thought?
Well, you're right. I think this question's probably above my pay grade, but I'm going to take a shot at it anyway. And the timing of it's ironic. Because I literally had two 20-something guys in here an hour ago, okay, wanting to buy a feedlot, wanting to get some expertise on. So you feed cattle, Brad. What should we be looking at? What questions should we be asking? So it's not completely dead. There's a few of these entrepreneurial, hardworking young people that are willing to take it on. The thing that the cattle thing. Of course, the biggest drawback here is risk. I mean, we got probably more financial risk in the cattle business now because of the record high prices than at any other time. Now, I can remember my dad cautioning me about, those cattle are awful high. You better write this down. You're never going to get $1 for cattle again. And, yada, yada, So, I mean, I don't want to be the old guy in the room to say that, this can't be duplicated or even exceeded again. But one of the things, and maybe this is a nuance and maybe this is me, this is my chance to preach and I apologize. But one of the things that I really, really supported was a mandatory a certain number of cattle that we had to negotiate for. Senator Grassley and I presented a number of places for 50-14, and that was an aggressive bill. 50% cattle get negotiated for, and they're all delivered in 14 days. That got watered down to a 30-14, and it was very polarizing within the NCBA and other places. But to me, it was a situation where it allowed the small guy, the farmer, the non-corporate feeder to have at least a kind of a level playing field with the big corporates that had, in many ways, a lot of other advantages. They don't right now because they don't have enough cattle, but that changes. That's cyclical, So, stuff like that, I think would be helpful to give that young guy a chance at feeling like he isn't fighting City Hall, right? That he isn't up against all the corporates who have all the advantage and stacked against him.
All right. And the other question that we wanted to talk about today, Brad, is a little bit closer to your profession and the marketing of cattle. The question, has the steeply discounted futures, we've talked about that before, has that given or helped the feedlot earn any more leverage? What do you think about that question, Brad?
I love that question because there's a lot of nuance to it, Chad. It's been the steeply discounted futures to cash has been interesting and record-breaking levels, frankly. So what does that encourage if you think about it? If the markets function, to predict price, to go to a price high enough that we raise more of it or use less of it, to go to a price low enough, like we're doing with corn, to where we increase demand and maybe slow down production, right? A function of the market, very basic. So right now the market is telling the producer that it's not going to stay this high. Okay, August cattle are $223.90. Now, whether that's the right thing or not, I'm not saying that, but the market feels like it's not going to stay that high. October is lower than that yet. So, if you're a producer and you're looking at that well, these cattle are just about fat, futures are at a big discount. That would imply that it looks like maybe it's going to go lower. I'm going to sell what I have now. So by selling what you have now, you create currentness. And maybe even selling what you might have waited a whole month for to sell any other time, especially at a time if futures were carrying a premium and that was incentivizing you to say, I'm going to make them bigger. That's what I am trying to get my head around. Where are we going to have this tipping point where the feed is cheap, replacement cattle are really high priced. Why don't I just feed what I got longer? They're not doing that in the north yet, but there's going to be a spot where I think that's a huge macro in the market that's going to make all the difference in the world. So that does create leverage because it gets us to be current. Now, I would add one thing to that, and I'm not crazy about the steep discount that the futures have to cash, because especially in the corporate South, if you're a hedger, you love this basis, right? Because you can't wait to sell cattle. It actually has a tendency to drag the market down because people are easier sellers, and I think, than they would have been otherwise, because they can't wait to cover their hedge and get, this plus basis deal. And so it isn't all perfect. I would like to have us closer. I'd like to have more divergence in my opinion. And there's actually some working within the industry. I know Iowa cattlemen are putting together a proposal right now on a committee that I'm on, trying to explore the idea of, could you put a demand feature into the contract, or maybe for the last week of the contract, the long could say, hey, bring the cattle. That would fix the basis like in 3 minutes, if you could put something like that. So anyway, working on it, but the CME is slow to change, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's for sure. We've seen that in the past too. Yeah,
for sure.
I appreciate the questions very much. If you have a question that you would like us to address on a future cattle call program, be sure and put that in the comments. Oh, and while you're down there, hit that notifications button. That'll let you know when the next one comes out, so you'll be ready to hear this week's commentary. Speaking of this week, just a few sales in cattle country, and I've seen some in Kansas, a few in Iowa as well. Where are we at with that, and what are you thinking when things do break loose for this week, Brad?
The early indications are at least fully steady, because we've traded some cattle that way already. The South has traded a few cattle at 230, which would tie the highest or the best price the last week. And on a Wednesday, that's a great sign. There's been just a tiny bit of 240. I'm trying to chase down a pretty reliable source that told me that there was a little bit of 242, which would be the very, very extreme high in the North last week. I think we're going to trade 242 or maybe a little bit better than that in the North, and maybe more like 232 or 3 in the South before it's all said and done this week, barring something weird. But we sure closed good today, and we have a good feeling going into tomorrow for sure.
Yep. All right. It's always good to talk to you, Brad. For folks that would like to reach out and see what you guys got going on up there in Northwest Iowa, how can they do that?
You can start by kkbtrading.com, or even better, give us a call, 712-722-0023.
Brad, it's good to have you on the air. We'll talk to you next week, okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Again, that's Brad Kooima, and Varilek at Sioux Center, Iowa, on today's Cattle Call. Again, if you've got a question, be sure and put that in the comments below. Hit that notification button, and we'll talk to you next week. Again, Cattle Call, a production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association, brought to you by Wolf Auto, small town strong. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week on Cattle Call.